Okay, my skin. I
I
just
thought I was
want
last.
to ask a question for Rav Yair, just to start the conversation. You mentioned that a new approach to learning Gemara, which moves away from classic analytics and moves toward a more holistic, emotional approach that encompasses everything. And one of your rides for it was that Rav Kook and Inayah. So it is true that Rav Kook did engage in Inayah, but I'm just curious that if you look at Rav Kook's comments on classical sugyas and the halacha brura, so there's nothing not traditional about his style of learning. Not only that, but like the Svat Emet, we mentioned also. So if you look at his style of learning, so it's classic analytical. Tzvi Yehuda famously quoted the Chadam Sol there that you can't mixing Agadah and it's like kilayim, it's a forbidden mixture. Look at Rabbi Ram Shapiro's commentaries on Shas. It's classical. Look at Rabbi Sternberg, who's certainly the biggest Talmud Chacham in the Aram War world, which is clearly from the genre of Rav Kook. It's classical. Even, and this is really the lowest blow. Even if you look at Rav Ray McCullen's Sefer Badi Aram, okay, so it's classical lumbus. So my question really is I'm sensitive to where you're coming from, but I'm just curious, like, you do see a dichotomy here between the way more broad-minded thinkers, I don't know, Kook would access Agada or Agadah versus how they would deal with halacha or learning. I'm just curious how you would deal with that.
Okay. I
Don't just think that.
oh, yeah. No, I agree. I have in my what's it called? Dining room. Like I have all of Rav Kook's books on Gemara. I agree 100% that there is a need to learn Gemara. I'm not belittling that at all. But my question is that where it should end? And I think that's what Inayah is saying. Like Inayah is saying that all of that type of learning is at the end of my learning. And I think that it should be the beginning process of where I'm taking the Gemara to. So as much as it's important to analyze, understand, and analytically learn the Gemara, if it ends there, then it translates to a certain understanding of why I'm learning Gemara. The Gemara is, I don't think that it begins with the Gemara. I think it begins with the Tanakh. I think when you see the topic that you're learning, and you learn from the Tanakh, it creates a different understanding of what the Gemara is saying. And after you begin from the Tanakh, you go into the Gemara, you continue from the Gemara. That's, I think, something that Rav Kook was demanding in Einayah. Not to just say the Gemara is the end, it's the beginning. And from there, I continue to go. I know the Rav Ram, I learned to know Yah, I love it. I love learning Ritba and Rashba, I do. Like, I learn on my own, I learn with Adiyah. I have a great time. Like, with different kids. But I'm saying that my main question is that where it ends? And I think that that's our demand. And I think it's unique in this yeshiva that we don't stop there. That's the beginning, and then we go beyond that and add more. Really best friends.
Prior to Rav Yair, so you pointed out that somebody who was thinking much more rational, that he would be connected to the Tanakh much more than somebody who is much more emotional. But how far can you make a congregation between the Tanakh and rationality, though it perhaps is a dissonance?
Wait, again, sorry, I'm just trying to...
You pointed out an irrational person would be much more connected to the Tanakh than an emotional person. But what if there is no congruation between the thinkings of the Tanakh and your thinkings, and it's just a dissonance? How can you connect to the Tanakh?
If someone it feels like they're not in that place of emotion.
Yes.
So I'm saying that I think we demand of ourselves often to struggle with learning more, understanding more. But I think every single one of us, and you could disagree with me, every single one of us have emotion, but we're not taught to work on emotion. We're just taught, like, you feel things, right? You either love someone or don't love someone, hate someone or not hate someone. Tefillah is something that is called avodah shebalev, but the idea is that we work on certain areas, but we don't work on other ones. And I think that we have to demand that even if someone doesn't feel, like, I know, like, girls used to always make fun of me in camp, that my heart was on my sleeve, right? It's like crazy emotional guy, constantly crying, like all these different things. So I'm saying, like, oh, Yair's an emotional guy, so then I should learn Tanakh. And other people that aren't emotional, like, they don't need it. But I demand from myself to learn Gemara. It's not easy for me. When I got smicha, it was the hardest 4 years of my life. Hardest 4 years, right? I'm not a natural halacha learner. I love halacha. I'm not exactly excited about learning it. I love Sfat Emet. I love Rav Kook. I love Torah. It's not easy for me to demand of myself to learn halacha. But I realize that I have that side to me, and I need to work on that side. So I think that it's not specifically to Tanakh, but I think every one of us are built out of emotion and intellect. When we speak about intellect, everyone understands you have to work on it. But on emotion, you either feel it or don't feel it. And that's where I question, why is it like that? Why do we feel that need to constantly work on our minds, on our brain? But with emotion, that's something that, like, there's emotional people, and then there's not emotional people, but everyone has to learn Torah. And I think Tefillah is demanding of us to say that every one of us have to also work on our emotional relationship, and not just on our intellectual relationship.
But it's not demanded to follow ignorance or naivety to have finding joy and connection. So this is the danger I see.
No, I believe that there's so much danger in emotion. I see it. I see it on myself. I don't think it's the healthiest thing in the world. But I also think that there's also danger with learning. And because there's danger with learning, it doesn't stop us from learning. So because there's danger with emotion, that's enough to say that we don't have to deal with it. So I'm saying, you're right, there's crazy dangers. Like, people translate, I have all my friends that I grew up with in high school, that they translate emotion into something that has nothing to do with Torah, right? They're constantly, doesn't really matter, like, we'll get there at different points in our life, right? So I'm saying that when we say that there's a danger in emotion, I agree with you, and that's why we have to deal with it, because there's a danger. And if we don't deal with it in an honest and a deep way, then we're not being responsible for half of who we are. That's how I see it, if that makes sense.
Jason?
So this is for Rav Felix.
We're
So
gonna
the Gemara about Lo L'Shamayim he, so you use it to prove that Torah is more of an individual thing. But if I'm remembering correctly, I thought the reason why the rabbis poskened against the halacha that was coming from Shemayim was because of the idea of that we go by the majority. There was one rabbi who was saying one thing that God agreed with him, but the reason why we ruled against him was because we had the system that we have in place says that we go by the majority. So it doesn't seem like it's an individual kind of way of viewing Torah.
Thank you for that question. It's a good request for clarity. I think you're absolutely right. Torah is not about, go your own way and everyone figures it out for themselves. But the process of figuring it out for the community, it is a communal endeavor. And that's the point of that Gemara, as I mentioned, I'm sure you remember, it's placed in a sugya of interpersonal relations, not hurting people's feelings, about living in community. And so the point there is that it's individual, we argue, we discuss, we have a freedom, an intellectual freedom, and then as a community we must make a decision. Majority rules is the best tool known to man for communities making a decision. So that it's individual in that I have an obligation to say what I think and figure it out for myself, and then I have a further obligation, which was the bone of contention in that Gemara, the tragic flaw in the characters in that Gemara, because they couldn't figure out how to each square each other's personal understanding and live together with it. So you're right, there's a tension there. We want to create a generation of Talmidei Chachamim who are rugged individualists, who are not afraid to think what they think and say what they say, and understand it their way, but who can then understand the other part of the lesson. We live in community, we live in a community that also stretches back in history. I owe them some respect, stretches down to the next generations. I owe them a lot of responsibility, and in the here and now, I owe responsibility to my peers, to my colleagues, to be a team player. So it's not an absolute, existential, Nietzschean, I make my own rules, I do it for myself. I do that, and then I come to terms with, well, what about my place in the Jewish community?
A lot of questions, two more questions.
So kind of building on Jason's question, where exactly do you see us as like the new students of Torah drawing the line? Because I find a lot with people like in yeshiva that we often question like the type of people before us, and then we wonder how progressive or how liberal can we take it, and how, where exactly can we tell ourselves that we should draw the line and show that respect for older generations, but also progress Judaism in a direction that makes sense and is for our generation and for our time?
Great question. The Jewish people are struggling with it right now, a number of fronts, where there are literally kihilot that, I wouldn't walk into that kihila, and they wouldn't walk into your kihila. So there are battle lines. There's like a front line, maybe I say front line, of difficult, tricky, as Rav Keith says, controversial, halachic discussions. I think everyone's obligation is to fight the good fight, to learn the material, to have the discussions, to make the decisions in concert, at the very least, with the community, right? Not, we have to have a minyan, right? Judaism is beautiful that way. It demands community, it demands minyan, it demands that we don't do it ourselves, that we, as all the great philosophers have ever said, man is a social animal, we live with others, that's what life is about. And Judaism is very much there, as someone said, I think maybe Noam said, we're not into going off into the desert and being alone. One or two Jews like that. So I think the answer is, in many ways, a practical answer. You owe it to Torah, you owe it to Judaism, I want to understand this as best I can, I want to live it as best I can, I want to make it into the thing that makes me and all my peers the best people we can be. And if that's not the way you think we should do it, let's discuss, let's argue. If at the end of the day I have my shul and you have your shul, that's not such a tragedy. The beauty of the fact that we don't have a pope, there's not one final answer, but there's Shivim Panim, and 12 Sha'arim, and Svarim and Ashkenazim, and Misnagdim and Hasidim. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You can go around the corner to a different kind of shul. So I would say, that's where you have to go. Look, it's never going to be mutter to just order a ham sandwich, right? There are absolutes. There are chiyuvei makis and chiyuvei kares and chiyuvei avamisas veis. And we know there's a box. We live in the box, but the box is big. The box is changing. The box is somewhat permeable. We have to work it out together. The goal is to become a person who's seriously fighting that fight. The more Jews we have who are not just sitting on the sidelines, but arguing about the women's rights and these guys' rights and those guys' rights and do it this way and do it that way, the better the conclusion will be. The fewer people we have arguing about it, the weaker the conclusion will be.
There's one last question. The last question was a lot of questions. There's a real better way than to end with a question from Daniel Levy.
This is a question for Rav Yair. Do you think that Judaism rooted more in emotion than intellect is b'diavad, or it has a lot of strength in its own right?
Again, so you're saying, is it more important intellect or emotion, or is it the same?
Is intellect the ideal where emotions are kind of b'diavad, or are both ideals in their own right?
I mean, but I guess like most of the questions that come from Daniel, and probably from all of Israel, right, are like, what are you really trying to say about this concept of emotion within Torah? That's what you're asking, right? What's the place? There was a genius in Tanakh by the name of David HaMelech. Okay, David HaMelech, his one thing that he wanted to do was build Beit HaMikdash, and God says what? No, right? He says yes. How did he say yes? What? No, not his son. What does David HaMelech do to Beit HaMikdash? That he actually redefines the idea of Beit HaMikdash. So Divrei Hayamim Aleph, right? Perek Tedvav. David HaMelech says that from now on there will be song in Beit HaMikdash. Before that there was no singing, right? I'm a Levi. I know John Herman. I don't know. Usually Thursday we have like aliyahs together, right? We're Levim in the Mishkan did not sing. David HaMelech comes to the world and says song is essential to Beit HaMikdash. And it's not, it didn't start with Rav Shlomo Carlebach. Like, I love him. He's like one of my, didn't start with Rav David Silverstein or with Rav Felix, Rav David. They all love singing, they all know it. But what David HaMelech was saying is that the beauty, I think, of Judaism is harmony. It's harmony. And it's saying that we have to recognize that the same demand that we have for intellect is the same demand we have for emotion, and emotion is not fluff. It's not fluff. Singing a niggin is not cute. It's a real avoda. The Levim in Beit HaMikdash, it's called avodah b'Beit HaMikdash. When you play a niggin, right? When you play a niggin, it's like, fine, let's do a cute thing before shir, right? Why is that different than learning? Why is that b'di'evet? Why is that fluff? Why is that something that we do if you're on the outside, but if you're on the inside, we don't need that. So we're really saying that the intellect is the ideal, and the emotions are people on the street. And by saying that, I think we're making the wrong idea of what David HaMelech was saying about Beit HaMikdash, that the Nipunim are avodah. They're not just songs. It's not b'di'evet, and it's 50% and 50%. It's harmony, and if you don't have that harmony, Torah will not exist.
Then how do you find healthy balance?
Healthy balance? It's Tefillah and Torah.
But how do you determine
I'm saying-
what you get more of?
What do you do more?
So
I'm saying I need to work more on Torah, right? I'm naturally, I don't know why I was born this way, naturally crying all the time. right? My parents said, like, was the Olympics, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm crying constantly since I was born, right? I have one kid like that, one kid not like that. I know that my demand, if I want harmony, is to sit and learn Masechet Tzvachim. I'm doing a siyum on Sunday. That's me, that's Yair. If you're in a person that has so much intellectual ability, you demand of yourself to create harmony by playing a niggin to yourself every single morning. And that's understanding who you are and understanding that both these sides have to be a part of your experience because it's not only you, it's a message that's much wider to everyone else. And if we neglect one, then we remove half of Am Yisrael. That's the beauty of the Baal Shem Tov. That makes sense.
All right, guys, I just want to give huge props to Rav Felix and Rav Yair. Anyway,
What
again,
about Am Yisrael?
and Am Yisrael. But just to reiterate, I keep saying over and over again, is that again, you see how exciting conversation can potentially be in the base measures with the diverse staff we have here. So again, I just want to encourage everybody that again, this is only the beginning of the conversation. Keep questions.
Just like Gemara, it's just the beginning.
Exactly.
Yes! We won Rama! Yes! Rav Doubles! Rav David and Rav Doubles. Gemara's just the beginning.
Anyway, guys.
You know that you have to end the sukkah with whatever.
Anyway, guys, Shmaya, and we'll start morning later.